Well, hello again, and hello, Kim.
Hello, Pam.
So we're chatting to Kim, and we've done two chats. This chat is going to focus, as a carer of 8 years, coming from Southern Africa, what were the things that you were tripped up by? What were the things that didn't work for you? Because we've spoken about the fact that self-development became an issue. Your personal development was highlighted. So can you just give some insight into what didn't work for you?
Well, I think what didn't work for me is I don't know if it's a word, but the unpreparedness of the industry. I think you know, I looked at the industry and I thought, well, I can do this. I'm a parent. I've kept a home. I know how to do the basics. I mean, how hard can it be? And so I think I was completely tripped up by the fact that that's exactly what it wasn't like. Yes, elements of it were, but to a large extent, I was completely unprepared for the trauma, almost the emotional kind of trauma, the working with some very severe dementia clients, for example, dealing with them and being able to be in a situation where I was able to go and self-regulate and come back into the room and move in and out and do things that would help me to cope with that. And I think that's where the industry's biggest downfall is that, you know, a lot of agencies can't wait to get their carers out into the market because obviously it's good for them, it's good for the carers, but there's no real kind of follow-up when they're in their position. There's no one you can pick up the phone and say, my gosh, Mrs. J ran out in the middle of the night into the snow with no clothes on. What the hell do I do? I mean, how do I cope with that? What am I, those kind of, I mean, that's an extreme situation, or not so extreme because it happened to me, but these are the things that happen on your first or second placement. And I remember honestly crying through my first 2, 3 placements that I had in this country. I just was in tears. I said to my husband, I can't do this. I absolutely can't do this. And it wasn't because I wasn't capable. Having been a teacher, I was very organized, very good at what I did. I had all the technicalities behind me. There was no issue there, but I didn't have a clue how to deal with the complex nature of us humans and what trips us up. And so for me, that was the biggest downfall that I faced in the industry.
And I'm glad you mentioned that you ended up in tears, because for many of us, exactly the same thing happened for various reasons. I mean, I was a registered nurse and a midwife. I'd been practicing for a few years already. I was very organized like you. I knew about health. I knew about all of these things. But care is very different to
Yeah.
nursing. And in fact, there's some major no-nos that you cannot take over to care that you have in nursing. In nursing, it's about getting somebody back to health. In care, it's about giving them a life that suits them, helping them to live the life they want, not the one you choose.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that I found tripped me up, and I don't know if you found it, was the culture shock. I assumed my mother was British, I'm English. How difficult can this be? I found it very hard. Plus, I found we are perceived as being different.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think also it's very difficult to get away from the master-slave relationship. I'm not saying it's completely rife in this country, but it's very difficult, especially when you're working with people that are a little bit more affluent, and you're in a situation where you really are treated more like a servant than a carer, and you end up doing jobs that are way beyond what your normal profile was. And how do you respond to that? How do you get through and try and keep your job? Because I think at the end of the day, we end up being those subservient kind of people, because we don't want to lose our job, we don't want to lose the income, we want to make sure that whoever employed us is going to want us back. So because of all these compromises we're making on ourselves all the time, we end up really becoming a really smaller version of who we are. And I think that's where it becomes dangerous, because no one is above anyone else. Everyone is on the same level, and everyone is learning and growing together. And I think it's a very difficult situation also being, coming from a life where you have had a little bit more help domestically or whatever the case is, and you coming into a situation now where you are the domestic. I mean, how do you deal with that? It's not that you are any less of a person. It's not that you're going into something that, you feel like you've gone 20 steps backward in life. It's kind of like, how do you embrace that and take that on board and really kind of like turn that around so it works for you? So yes, I mean, culture definitely comes into it. And but you know what? Kudos to us. People like to employ South Africans and Zimbabweans because they know we're great workers. They know that our ethics are good. They know that we get the job done. And I think, we really are sought after. And that's why for me, and a lot of my friends, there's never been a difficulty of finding work because they like to employ us. They know what we're about, and they know what we're capable of. So I think our upbringing serves us tremendously in the UK in terms of what we can bring and offer to the industry. So it's not all entirely bad in terms
No,
from a cultural point
but
of view.
from a cultural point of view, something I fell over, and I'm seeing a lot of other people have fallen over, is we're very principled.
Mm.
We're taught and we believe that having good principles is key, and you stick to those principles. The problem is that the principles work and are needed in Africa where the environment is different. But when you come to the UK, which is basically a safe country, people are to a large extent protected. There's still major issues, but to a large extent, compared to Africa, they're very protected. Those principles should not be the primary ones. There are other principles which become the primary ones, and many of us don't make that transition. Possibly because we're so principle focused that we're looking at those principles and not being open-minded enough. And this then becomes a personality failing, that we're too rigid. We're not in an open learning mindset. We think we are, but we're not. And I've seen the biggest casualties in carers come from that, is my belief. Have you got any comment on that?
Not that I've really seen it. I mean, I love the fact that when we say 2 o'clock, we mean 2 o'clock. I love that, I love that about us because we are so, and yes, that might seem to be rigid, but I think that families and clients might find us a little more rigid, but I think the broader medical fraternity find us to be brilliant because we are so thorough and so good with our timing and our our ability to really kind of hone in on the real sort of important issues of the care. And as I said, I mean, I've not really seen that to be an issue from my side. I think that I've only seen it to be a sort of an advantage.
But I think because you have, as you highlighted in your first thing, was once you'd got the nuts and bolts of the care job sorted, you immediately went into learning mode. And as soon as you're in learning mode, you are open-minded. And I think many of us who do think we're learners come with a baseline of beliefs and principles that actually need to adapt. So we're starting in the wrong place. And I think that's something that I found, and it made us too outspoken about things, which didn't serve us well. You mentioned, which I think is related, is you had a problem with boundaries. Well, I didn't have it quite as much, but I do still think it exists. What was your experience with boundaries in being asked to do things that are not really carer work?
Well, yeah, here's the interesting thing, because boundaries for me evolved from the beginning of where I was to where I am today, and as I've grown in confidence, my boundaries have become stronger and a lot smarter. And I think, in the beginning, my boundaries were incredibly porous. I would do anything that anyone asked me to do. Like catch the client when they're falling. It was like such a natural instinct. I'm not saying today I'd let them fall, but I certainly wouldn't put myself in harm's way. So those kind of boundaries
And in
were
fact, you're not supposed to catch them.
no, no, of course not. But you know what? You think you're the hero in the
Yes.
early days of caring, and you want to be seen to be the person who would go to the other ends of the world to save mom who's, had a fall. I'm going to stop her from hitting the ground and breaking her leg, or whatever the case is. And you do silly things because your boundaries are not in place. But later, as you get more confident and you're not so worried about how others are going to perceive you and what the implications are going to be, you start becoming a little less kind of tied up with pleasing and doing things that you're not supposed to be doing. And I kind of like now I'm sort of quite clear when it comes to boundary setting, and what it is that I'm prepared to do. And, small things like manual handling, there's certain things I will not do, which I would have done 7 years ago, no problem, because
And I
I was
think,
at a different point. So I think your evolution of confidence and when you realize that actually there is a lot of work out there, and if people don't like you, that's okay. Move on.
yes,
It's okay to not
however,
be liked,
I think I fully agree with you, but we have the right to live and work in the UK. For people who are coming over on sponsorship, very different,
Exactly.
especially when the care agency is sending them out to placements with not even a day or two in between. They're moving every 2-3 weeks, and the client is being told, you don't need a housekeeper, you don't need anything. You've got a carer for 24 hours. There's no boundaries around time, around housework, cooking, caring for them. Plus, with the advent of remote working apps, you will get calls saying, it's 2 minutes past the hour. Why hasn't your client had their medicines yet? You're being micromanaged on a huge scale rather than being allowed to build a relationship to meet those needs. So I think there's you and I are in a lucky position. Plus, we come from a background of being in charge, and we've managed to adapt. I think you and I had different personality traits. But even so, it's very hard to set boundaries because you need to know what boundaries are permissible. So on our next chat, I want us to talk about advice we would give to new carers or to people wanting to come over. So thank you for that insight into what's not so great about the care industry and the things that we struggled with. Speak to you soon, Kim.
Pleasure. Just
So hello again, Kim. It's been fabulous chatting to you about the three things: why you're in care, the good things, the bad things. Now let's give advice to new carers, to people who are thinking about coming into the care industry. What advice would you give them, Kim?
Well, I think top on my list would be find your community, find your tribe. Get involved in a group, get involved with a support system that can be with you from day one, that can encourage you, that you can co-regulate with, that you can feel safe with. Don't try and do this in isolation. You will not cope. It will not be sustaining. It won't be something that you look forward to or you want to do unless you have support structures in place. That would be my biggest go-to advice for anybody coming into this country or coming into this industry, because it can be incredibly isolating. It can be incredibly lonely. And unless you've got people on your side that you can work with and you feel safe with, you're not going to survive. End of story.
Yeah, can I add to that? The isolation and the overwhelm is mind-blowing. And we as Southern Africans tend to go into lager mentality. We feel it's up to us, we've got to do this. And I'm not saying there's things that we shouldn't be doing. You still need to take responsibility. But one of the ways in which we can take responsibility is getting your tribe together, finding people you can talk to. But having done some of this support work now, I've realized there are some people who lean too strongly on their support network and expect too much. You've got to get a balance. You've got to say, hold on, these are the things I need to do. I can ask for advice. I can ask for things, but I still need to do it. My support group is not going to solve it for me. They're going to give me advice. They're going to give me support. They're going to help me through it. But I've still got to do the work myself. And there are some carers who didn't quite get that. They seem to feel that somebody out there was going to solve the problem for them. Not true. You still have to deal with it yourself. So yes, get your tribe, get your support network. So important. But you also need to do your work yourself on you to build that resilience, those skills, that ability.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think, people come together in group situations for one thing, and that is to be validated on how they're feeling. So I think if you come into a group and you're searching for answers, or you are offloading all the woes of the care industry, and you're sort of injecting a really kind of bad energy into the group, and it's really making everyone feel uncomfortable. I think the most important thing, as I say, is that we want to know that people understand how we're feeling. And I think sometimes, it is very much a part of being, in charge of a group, for example, where you're able to have that capacity to validate somebody, understand how they're feeling, and then to kind of move on gently onto the next person. And I think really, we don't get it validated enough in the industry. We don't get told, that's normal. You're doing a really great job, and it's absolutely understandable that you should feel that way. And, it is tough, and I'm sorry you're going through that. And it is hard, and we're here for you. And, never forget you're doing an amazing job, or whatever it is, whatever it looks like. Every single person, every single one of us needs that. And if a group just provides validation for its group members, that's good enough, because suddenly you come away from there and you go, you know what, people get me, and I understand this, and people are on the same journey, and I feel good. I feel good that someone's got my back. I feel good that I can co-regulate with people in the group, that they can make me feel good just by being there and understanding me. So I think it's you've got to come into a group situation understanding that it's not to really vent what's going on in your life. That's not going to help you, in a sense, and it might not help the people that are in the group. Absolutely say how you feel, but don't pinpoint areas that are going terribly wrong, because the whole idea about a group situation is uplifting each other. You're there to appreciate and be grateful for each other. And I think, I think people have to just keep that in mind and keep that in check when they come into a group situation, is the support they're going to get. It's not an offloading situation.
And also the support they're going to give.
Yes.
It's a reciprocal arrangement. Yeah. And I think you've highlighted it really well. And you mentioned something in our first video, which was about grieving. And you've got to move through the grieving process. And that is up to you to do. So, for instance, the grieving process is this whole denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, moving on to hope. And I've met a few who have not got out of denial and anger, and they are stuck in it. And they are toxic to the group because they're staying in that. And every time you think they've learned something and that they're moving on to denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, they come back to the first two steps, denial and anger. And this, I think, links back to the self-development you spoke about. Going into care work in a foreign country is a huge opportunity for self-development. And I think that you need to actually tackle it forcefully. If you think that you're going to get into this world without changing, you're going to fall on your nose, because you will change. Would you agree with me? There's no way you're not going to change.
Yeah, and I think people are very, very quick to blame their external situation for where they're at. And they forget that it's a lot to do with their internal situation, how they're responding to things. You can't expect other people to change, but you can change the way you respond to people. So it's just kind of and again, that goes with a lot of work on yourself, understanding and being able to look at situations differently. And I think in that case, you're in a cycle, and sometimes you can't break that cycle. You need somebody else to break the cycle. A group situation is not going to break that cycle for you. You need to actually be guided to the work that needs to be done, so that you can come back into that group situation as a different person, and then suddenly now you're helping other people, as
Exactly.
opposed to being the one that. So I think it all boils down to the fact that, people need help and they're grappling for help, but no one knows where to start. No one knows, like, what is it that I need to do? How do I get out of my own way? How do I actually, like, be there for other people and not look at the world as if it's all about me? And that
And that
are
they're
other
all
people,
against me.
and they're all against me.
Yeah.
And this whole, because I think we get so wrapped up in this external environment, and we blame other people, things, circumstances, situations for the way we are.
Yes.
And I think we really need to realize that actually those situations or circumstances are an actual reflection of our inner world and the way we are.
And
So
I
it's
think,
time to change that.
And I think it stems back to the principles, because I came from that world of saying, I'm trying my best, but it's not working. Therefore, the world's against me. And these people who said to me, you know what happens is a reaction, and what you do is a reaction. Take a breath between that, because I think, no, there's cause and effect. It's a scientific fact. There's cause and effect. If this happens, I will respond like this. But when I started looking at myself physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, rather than just physically and mentally, looking at the spiritual and emotional world, even though it didn't really speak to me, I started learning skills that allowed me to take that breath. Because I think we need to understand anything we can do is a set of skills. It's a set of behaviors, actions. If you don't know how to do those actions, you can't do them. You can't even see them. It's like if you don't know the term for something, you can't understand it fully. You need that key action to be able to do it. So, for instance, I've just done a course on positive intelligence, and it teaches you about building up your positive waves in your brain so that your default is to a more positive rather than to reactive negative. And it gives you that pause so that when something happens in your care life, you can take that breath and respond differently because you've learned how to do it. Many of us didn't learn how to do it. I came from a very reactive world and I didn't know how to do it. And I've had to teach myself. So, like you were saying, it's up to each one of us to go out there and learn different skills to change what it is that we're highlighting in the group. And then come back to the group and say, that problem I had, this is giving me some solution, and share that solution with people. So I think between us, because you're coming from a far more gentle world, I'm coming from a far more reactive place, and yet we've still ended up in the same place now.
Yeah. And I think, look, I think reactive was the survival of the fittest, and don't get me wrong, when my children were at school, I was very much a reactive parent. I mean, because lo and behold, anything happened to them, I didn't even think for 1 minute that I was going to go into reaction mode. And I think coming from that very reactive way now enables me to be able to respond and not react. And I think there's the difference. And enabling us to respond is, like you said, is to take that breath in between. And if it can be a heart-centered breath, even better, because then you can drop straight out of your head into your heart, and you're straight away from that noise. And that allows you then to not react. I mean, it's human nature to react and be protective. It's how we built, it's how we wired, it's who we are. So you can understand years and years of those evolutionary processes where we have been reactive, and now suddenly we're trying to change ourselves by being responsive as opposed to reactive. It's a big ask, and it takes a lot of practice, a huge amount of practice.
So this is where it comes back to what you said, is we need to learn different skills. Mm-hmm. And as a carer, you need to pay attention to all of those. And it is your physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional sides. And all of those need to have some work done. Physically, you need to make sure you're in a good position. You need to do your own stretching, your own limbering up, your own water, your own nutrition, because you're going to get colds, flus, you're going to get strains and backache and things like that. You need to prepare yourself. So even physically, you need to do it, not just on the emotional and spiritual side as we've been talking. So you've mentioned now, and I think we'll talk about this more in the next one, is a heart-centered pause so that you can respond rather than react. Because I think if I had to give anyone advice in the UK, take a deep breath first, look around the world you're in, and then respond appropriately for the world, not for what you've been taught as a child, because that was a different world. And you might have been very successful in that world, but it doesn't translate well to the UK.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think it's all a learning process. We never stop learning as individuals, you know, and we're always placed in situations that are going to force our hand to learn and learn how to do things differently. So I think life is amazing, and I think the care industry is amazing. And I think if we can use every opportunity in every placement that we're in to enable us to grow, we're on a road to the most beautiful evolutionary process that we could ever have for ourselves.
Fully agree with you. And like you did, you made sure that the first few were repetitive so that you could get your physical skills in hand. And then you could move those to new situations and expose yourself to new opportunities to learn, which gave you the emotional and spiritual growth, which is fabulous. And your clients, as well as you, benefited, and your wider circle of your husband, your children, everyone else benefited. So, like you say, it is a fabulous breeding ground for learning.
Yeah, 100%.
Great. So thank you for that, Kim. So this is advice for new carers coming in. It's not quite as simple as you think, but very doable. The next thing I want to talk about is the work you do, which is, we alluded to at the beginning, where you said you do we work as opposed to me work. So let's move on to that. Thank you so much for this chat, Kim.
It's a pleasure, Pam. Look forward to the next chat.
Bye.
Bye.